This is Rick. Hello and welcome to Champion Individual Rights, where I always focus on the importance of digesting reality in a moral context. Today, we live in a world where U.S. politicians are behaving as if individual rights don't even exist. What can we do to turn this situation around? We have to begin by digesting reality in a moral context. Today, I was going to focus on explaining my situation as being a targeted individual. It all started in 1984 when I wrote an article challenging the Detroit Free Press over an article written by Tom Opry. This article appeared on the back of the sports page the morning after the Detroit Tigers had won the World Series in 1984, and it promoted for putting taxes on cigarettes that were being sold on Indian reservations. I immediately noticed that there was a between-the-lines attack in the paper, and the late talk show host Mark Scott also noticed that they were after someone. I actually received a phone call from Mitch Albom, and I think it was the next day there was a large picture of an Aboriginal Indigenous person on the front page of the paper. The attacks on me were intense, and through a heckling operation, I was being driven out of my jobs. I noticed that this information followed me wherever I went. When I was in Flint, not only was I being targeted in the building I lived in and while I was out and about, there were also decadent verbal assaults that were taking place on TV, including pro and college sporting events. I recorded it and showed the tapes to a friend. Then, they started to target him with a decadent verbal assault. He was sometimes followed on foot for long distances. He was even injured by a bottle that was thrown from a vehicle. When he went to another city to visit a lady friend, within 2 days, the pounding started up on the walls, and the verbal assaults also started up out in the parking lot. On one occasion, 7 to 8 teenagers were screaming obscenities that were directed at him for around 15 minutes. These kinds of attacks are meant to make the target snap, or to depress the target to the point where they become suicidal, or even wind up committing suicide, which is why I consider gang stalking to be a mass murdering operation. While traveling to Colorado on Greyhound in an attempt to escape this harassment, the attacks started at the Chicago bus station, where a black man stood in front of me where I was sitting and started to yell the same decadent verbal assault that I had become familiar with. A clerk behind the counter said, "That sure looks like the guy." The stalking followed me on the buses all the way to Denver, Colorado. I stepped on the wrong bus and some black man yelled out a decadent name. I had to wait for the right bus, and there was a group that got off of another bus, and they yelled at me and told me that they were saying on the radio that I was a real asshole. I was targeted the next morning at a McDonald's, and some people that were on the bus were there. I was also targeted at a motel. Down the road, I was also targeted at, of all places, Target. I was targeted at Target. I could hear people saying shit, and one lady said, "Oh, everyone knows who he is." Around 10 days later, that was the same thing a lady said working behind the post office counter in the small mountain town where I now live. Before I left Michigan, verbal attacks took place against me at Ford Field. This was during the college football MAC championship game. I know these attacks took place, and my friends saw the tapes. Interestingly, I could find no proof of these attacks taking place through internet searches. On Fox News, they did mention these attacks and said that they were glad that it wasn't one of their teams. While I was still in Michigan, I think it was 2014, Fox News did a report on the verbal assaults. And while they were explaining what was going on, they showed a clip of top U.S. politicians standing in a row mocking someone. As they showed this clip over and over, they went on to explain that the verbal assaults that were taking place at sporting events were political attacks. So I now know that it is U.S. politicians that are behind this massive stalking operation that is taking place against me. Because these are political attacks, I decided to start releasing my political perceptions. Thinking back several years, while staying in Flint, Michigan, I wrote a proclamation for individual rights in a support group newsletter. Within days after it was published, when I returned to the building, a huge decadent verbal assault took place, driving me from the building. Although I have been targeted since 1984, I had no idea that organized stalking even existed. In 2015, while getting stalked by my neighbors in an apartment complex where I now live, I typed in organized harassment in a YouTube search, and all sorts of stuff was available from other targeted individuals. I could see that this was happening to a lot of people across the United States and around the world. I am very thankful for all of those videos. Today, the rights of Americans are being violated through organized gang stalking, which is why I put my focus on the importance of the recognition of individual rights. If we are not going to fight and promote for our rights and the rights of the citizens around the world, then the gang stalking taking place around the globe is only going to continue to intensify. I'm no expert on gang stalking. The only advice I can give other targets is record everything you can. You need a burden of proof. People don't like it when you violate their privacy by pointing a camera at them, which is why I like using video sunglasses. Lately, I've been using my smartphone, which can record video and even audio, which doesn't drain the battery that quickly. Also, don't let gang stalkers get inside of your head, which is what they have done to me all these years. Your happiness or your unhappiness comes from within you, not from external forces. Try not to let gang stalkers or their episodes haunt you for long periods of time. Also, if you have become sensitized to the colors of cars, that is just what trolls and perpetrators want to see on your videos. It is time to start fighting and promoting for the rights of the people of the world. Today, mankind is faced with a moral dilemma, of which requires a moral solution. It must be recognized that the moral law applies to all rational creatures necessarily, to all of the human race, and that would just happen to include the political leaders of the world. It must be recognized that the politicians should be bound to the same laws of the conscience that the average individual is bound to. It is only through our moral cognition and our ability to digest reality in a moral context that mankind can achieve its ultimatum: world peace through the recognition of individual rights on a global basis, with the understanding that every individual should have a right to their own life, privacy, and possessions, regardless of their ethnicity or the geography upon which they preside. This is the exact opposite position of the morally bankrupt New World Order nonsense that is devastating our planet today. With the threat of nuclear war in the air, now is the time for a peaceful revolution of thought.